Hello everybody, this is Emmett Dingley. I'm the sales manager with Fairfax Realty Select. And today we're going to be doing a workshop on negotiation skills. And I'm going to take you through some of the basic ways in which we negotiate in real estate. And I'm going to have a special little section on the COVID-19 coronavirus addendum, because that's part of the potential part of the contract that also is a negotiating item. So here's where I'd like to start. I'd like to indicate to you that learning to negotiate is not a big, difficult left brain problem. This is something that we all can do. It's something that we learn how to do maybe as early as kindergarten. Robert Fulghum wrote a book, All I Really Need to Know, I Learned in Kindergarten, which maybe you need a little bit more than that. But there's an example of my grandkids negotiating over a toy, so you do start to learn how to negotiate early in life. So we possess already a lot of negotiation skills. We learned that my way or the highway, that only works for so long. You know, if somebody sees they're consistently losing because you're being more aggressive than they don't want to play with you anymore. Other kids, people, they want their way too. Some kind of compromise usually makes for a happier life. Reading other people can help also to disarm a conflict. And to give a little, to get a little, makes everyone a winner. Does negotiation mean confrontation? Well, I would say not necessarily, and probably in most cases, no. Do you need to put a game face on? What's the downside of not sharing with the other side? If you're making the other side kind of the enemy, it's going to be very difficult to reach compromise when you need it. Can one side get all they want without getting it all? Well, yeah. You don't always get everything you want, but if you get enough to be happy, then the contract or the situation can go forward. Is there such a thing as win-win in negotiations? Well, I maintain there is, and I'm going to be discussing that throughout this workshop. So, okay, there's different kinds of negotiations. So you would think the FBI would have a really very aggressive kind of way of negotiating. But in fact, they really don't. The FBI's top 5 negotiating techniques are: number 1, mirror your client's words and actions. I understand, I hear you, so you're telling me, just to be clear, you're trying to understand, get somebody to continue to talk. The more they talk, the more information you're going to get. Or number 2, work for a no instead of a yes. Is now a bad time to talk about a listing? You know, so perhaps you're getting somebody to say, well, not necessarily. Have you completely, say you're talking to buyers, have you completely scratched this neighborhood off your list? Well, you know, when you put it that way, well, maybe say, well, no, I could consider it. So let's say number 3 is practice proactive empathy. So you can say something like, I know it is difficult to be a buyer in this seller's market. I don't blame you for, or if you're talking to your seller, I don't blame you for feeling put upon with all these home inspection fixes. So you're identifying with them. You're trying to calm the waters, but you're letting them know that you're on their side. The next one is keep the other side talking. The more they talk, the more you're going to learn, and maybe there's always going to be some room to get something done. So you might say something, I get it that your client wants 3% closing cost assistance. You may be talking to the other agent. But can you get your buyer to see how this makes his offer non-competitive? Perhaps you would just, talk that way. Or maybe make them say that's right. Make them feel that they made the right decision. you don't necessarily want them to think you talked them into it. So those are techniques that the FBI uses to get somebody to talk more. When do we need to use negotiation skills in real estate? Well, we negotiate the buyer-broker agreement with the buyer, right? And we negotiate the listing agreement with the seller. And we negotiate a contract with other agents and the client. We negotiate home inspection issues with the other side. We negotiate walkthrough inspection issues. And we negotiate any last-minute credits that might be necessary to close. Those are just not all-encompassing, but those are typical ones. So now there's a special situation we've just come into, and that's negotiation in the age of coronavirus. There is a great YouTube put out by NVAR, and I don't know that you can see it on here. I don't suspect you can. Let me see if I can do this. And it takes you to this YouTube video where they explain the ins and outs of this new addendum we have called the COVID-19 addendum. So I'm just going to turn that back off at this point. So, but I want you to know that you can go to that YouTube video. Just go to NVAR and look for the COVID-19 information. Okay, so now I want to show you, this is the addendum. It's a one-page addendum. And what it's trying to say is that because of many restrictions on companies and individuals to be able to meet in person, many of the deadlines that are in our contract may not be possible to be met. And so the NVAR legal department came up with a simple addendum that is designed to protect the parties from default in the event they're unable to perform due to circumstances beyond their control. So it works for both buyer and seller, and it allows them to keep the contract active. It doesn't have to automatically default because you didn't make some deadline. So, and it defines an unforeseeable event, any event or circumstance beyond a party's reasonable control, which a lot of things, it may be that the title company is not able, they don't have enough people working, could be the lender, could be you can't get the HOA documents, and it could be a number of things. Now, HOA documents is a separate issue. I'll talk about that a little bit later. So, but the big point of this is that there's, in paragraph 2, no default. Buyer and seller shall not be in default or incur any liability to the other party for any losses or damages of any nature for failure or delay of performance in their obligations under this contract arising out of or caused by unforeseeable events. So it's not a get out of contract free card. They still have to meet the requirements of the contract, but they can both agree in this addendum not to hold each other liable for default because they can't meet certain deadlines. Now, those two paragraphs, 1 and 2, unforeseeable event and no default, that's the essence of it. Now, you can, in options 3 and 4, now these are optional paragraphs that you could use. Number 3 says general settlement date and deadline extension. So it says something like all deadlines under this contract, including settlement date, are extended by X amount of days. So prior to ratification of the contract, this might be something that you would allow an extra 3, 5, 10 days that you can agree upon it might take in order to get everything done due to circumstances beyond our control. Or, and this might be after ratification, paragraph 4 is specific extensions. The following check deadlines or settlement date are extended by a blank number of days. So it could be for settlement date, home inspection deadline, radon testing deadline, financing deadline, appraisal deadline, etc. So you might just check 1 or 2 of those things. If some of those have already passed, you don't want to include them again, and that's opening it back up. But something else that hasn't been done, you could check and say, we're going to give you a little extra time to get those things done. So the whole idea is to not have transactions crash because something couldn't be done beyond your control. I think it's a really neat document, but I'm no lawyer. Don't go by everything I say. But study this thing. I mean, you can get it at NVAR. Go to that webinar, NVAR webinar, and they'll explain it. They talk about all kinds of examples of when you would use it. And now you can use it over and over. So like if you had done some of the deadlines and they're already in the past, you could add one and then add one later on. So maybe you did the septic inspection deadline, but you hadn't done the seller purchasing another home deadline. Maybe you'd add that in. So up above where it says COVID-19 addendum, there's a number markup there. So that could be addendum 1, 2, 3. You could use it over and over again. Okay, so now I'm going to take you through negotiations that can happen both on the buy side and on the listing side. And on the buy side, as on the listing side, I'll take you through when you're negotiating with your client and when you're negotiating for your client. So for example, in negotiating with your buyer, well, what are you doing? Well, number 1, I would say, is setting expectations. Buyers have to understand what kind of market we're in, that this is a highly competitive market, and that winning a contract is not easy, and that they have to be willing to make some adjustments in their thinking. Is probably not a situation where you can lowball and expect to win a contract. But you might bring up, okay, now maybe in this situation with the coronavirus that maybe sellers are going to be having a harder time getting their house sold, so maybe there is a little more opportunity there. You want to state the value of a buyer agent. Some purchasers may not even realize that there is such a thing as buyer agency, that you're on their side, you're the one helping them see what advantages they could take advantage of in terms of how to win a contract. You're going to help them to do that. We no longer control access to information. Anybody can go on Zillow or Redfin or any number of third-party websites and look to their heart's delight about and take as much time as they want to learn about what's out in the market. We don't control that anymore. But we do have the advantage of understanding. When we go to the MLS, we can get agent notes from the listing agent. We can find out certain things that they may not know just by visiting third-party sites. Also, we can discuss with them ideas, techniques to learn maybe some advantages that they could bring to fore to make their contract look better to a seller. Well, for example, this COVID-19 agreement. A lot of buyers may be really nervous about the idea of entering into a transaction that, there's so many unknowns. And one of the things that you can bring to bear is that, well, we could include with our offer this COVID-19 addendum. And you explain in that this would allow a buyer to be able to get their earnest money back if they can't close for unforeseen reasons, reasons that are outside of their control. So this is a way maybe to keep buyers in the game where they might otherwise be thinking, oh my, I don't know if I really want to get into this. You want to explain the compensation method, that in 99.99% of cases, the commission that you get is going to come from the seller side, that the seller makes compensation available to the listing company, and then anything that's in the MLS must offer cooperating brokers a commission. So that's how you get paid. And that you don't necessarily get all of that money, you have to share some of that with your broker. So, that helps them understand a little bit that, there's only one case where they might actually have to pay the commission, and that would be a for sale by owner. But we also have a document that we can take to the FSBO and ask them for permission to see their property and ask them to pay a commission. If they're willing to pay a commission, well then again, the buyer doesn't have to. But if the buyer, despite all that, wanted to see the property and thought maybe if I got a good enough deal, maybe it's worth paying the commission, then that's why that would be the one instance where they would possibly pay a commission. You want to emphasize the need for a written agreement. By law in Virginia, you are not their agent. You cannot represent them. You cannot advise them unless you have a buyer-broker agreement signed by the buyer and the broker. That's buyer-broker agreement. You can negotiate the length of the agreement if they're not sure. They just met you. They don't know how long they, that's hard for me to commit for a long time to be working with you. You say, well, okay, for both of us, we're getting to know each other. Why don't we just make it for one day? We could make it for one house. We could make it for any number of days or hours or minutes even, I suppose. But there's a lot of flexibility there. So let's see how today goes. If we like what we're doing and that we're working well together, then let's go ahead and extend it to a reasonable amount of time in order to find them a home and in order to help them compete to win a contract. So you want to talk about negotiation terms of the agreement. By that I mean that you're going to let them know that it's not always the highest price that wins a contract. Sometimes what the seller wants from, say, perhaps competing contracts is better terms. Like, for example, say, I could find out whether it's important for them to perhaps have a little extra time in the home because the home that, say, they're using new construction and it's not going to, oftentimes they're not ready when the builder says they would be ready. They might need another week, 2 weeks, a month, 2 months of rent back. And the terms of that are usually where the seller then pays the buyer so much money per day for the amount of days that they're renting back, or perhaps you just come up with something that sounds a little bit more competitive than PITI. So the whole idea is you're going to talk about getting the win-win. We got to find a way that we do make a good enough offer that we could actually win the contract, but not so much that we're putting you, the buyer, in jeopardy. So that's our idea of how to work with a buyer. Now, let's say negotiating for your buyer. Well, here's where you probe for hints from the listing agent. You can ask as many questions as you want of the listing agent. They don't necessarily have to tell you everything, or anything at all, really. They just say, make your best offer. But you could say, okay, is there something that the seller needs that we could perhaps offer despite, not just the best price, but let's say if they need a rent back, Or maybe they need to close early, and the earlier the better. And if I could talk to the lender for my buyer, maybe perhaps we could close in 2 or 3 weeks instead of 4 weeks or 5 weeks. And that would make my offer more attractive to the seller, despite the fact maybe I didn't offer any more money than the next person did. Explore non-financial ideas to win the contract. Well, that's kind of it's not exactly non-financial, but it's not necessarily the highest price. Using emotional appeal to win over the owner. Surprisingly, this works more often than you would think. If your buyers really love the house and they really want it, ask them to write a letter to the seller about how much they appreciate how well the house was kept and all the nice things they did to renovate and improve the house, and that, you know, they love the neighborhood. I'm sure that, you know, you'd say something about they like everything about it in terms of location and whatever. Surprisingly, that does work for a number of owners. They like the idea of somebody who loves the house and loves what they did with it. So again, offering better terms, you know, closing sooner, perhaps giving them rent back. Reduce the barriers to acceptance. So you want to make it that you're as flexible as possible to enable this thing to close and the best terms for the seller. So offering a higher price strategically. So you can use, say, a escalation addendum. A lot of agents don't use that. That could be very effective. And so there you can say, well, you know, I'm going to protect you by saying this is the limit, this is as high as you would go. But other than that, you would beat out the competition by X amount of dollars, let's say $2,500, up to a maximum of, if they're the asking price is $500, maybe you say up to a maximum of $530,000, or whatever was your buyer was capable of doing. So those are ways in which you are really advising them. You're really helping them see ways in which they can win a contract where other agents may not go to all that trouble to help them. So, you know, you can point out to your buyers that buying a home without an agent is like going to court without a lawyer. Well, maybe not quite that degree, but, you know, don't you want someone on your side? I want to help you. I'm willing to spend as much time and energy as possible to help you win a contract and find the home of your dreams. So let's talk about the seller side, okay, on the listing side. So again, some of this is negotiating with the seller, and then we'll talk about negotiating for the seller. So first of all, you're negotiating the value of the home. This is probably the #1 big thing. And so most of the time, sellers want to hear that their home is worth lots and lots, and probably in many cases too much. And one of the things you want to talk to them about is that one of the worst things you can do is get too many days on market. So if you price the home too high, you're reducing the number of possible buyers. And by doing that, it's less likely you're going to be able to find a buyer quickly. So more days will probably go by before you get an offer that you consider acceptable. Maybe it'd be quite a few number of days. Now, what happens when you collect those number of days? It shows up on the MLS, and anybody can see that, whether they're using Zillow or Redfin or whatever else they're doing. It does show the days on market. And in this market, if you have not sold your home in 30 or 40 days, boy, that seems like a really long time, because so many other homes are selling in a few days or a week or two. What's wrong with your house is what the buyer's thinking. So the more often that that house remains on the market, the more the buyers start to think there's something wrong with it. And you're gonna end up getting a lower price, not a higher price, unless this, you know, fabulous one person shows up and offers you the dream price that you were hoping for. It's just not as likely. It's possible, but not as likely. So what you want to do is you want to focus on how can we get it sold quickly. And I would recommend that what you talk about is finding a price that is just as attractive as the home is. So you want to make the home as attractive as possible, have the best photos possible, and also not price too high so that you get multiple offers. So you get more people wanting to see the home, and the more people that see the home, the more likely you are to get offers. And so you might also have to negotiate the length of the agreement. So in terms of a listing agreement, you know, it used to be we would get at least 90 days. A lot of times we had 120 days, 180 days for a listing agreement. Well, in this market, when everything sells so quickly, the sellers are probably not going to think that you need 3 to 6 months to sell their house. And so you might want to make your offer more attractive to them if you're in competition for the listing by saying, well, look, I strongly believe I can get this house sold quickly if you and I agree on how to price it correctly and how to make it show the best. And so maybe you would say, you know, I'll just do a 90-day listing or maybe something less. And negotiating the commission, well, these days, everybody's well aware that Redfin is all over the airways offering 1% list side commission. And, you know, so we're under some pressure to deal with that. But I think also, I think it's important to know that we don't advertise any reduced commissions. We're not a discount broker, but you're 100% agent. You can do what you want. If you found that it is necessary to win an agreement to offer 1% list side, well, you're certainly welcome to do that. But, you know, I like to recommend to agents to try to hang on to your percents by maybe being willing to pay for some other things, smaller things like, say, home warranty, maybe even the home inspection, maybe the HOA documents, any number of things that might add up to a whole lot less than giving away 1 or 2% in commission. So there's a lot of things that you can negotiate in that regard, but the beauty of our system is you have control of that. You can do what you think is necessary. So now how about negotiating for your seller? Okay, so we want to talk about avoiding excessive days on market. We want to use coming soon effectively. So if, say, the house is not really quite ready, it maybe needs staging, and maybe it needs decluttering, maybe it needs painting, you can still put it on coming soon without getting any days on market in the MLS and buy some time to get the house fixed up, but at the same time letting the market out there know that there's probably buyers out there who want that neighborhood or just are really interested in that house. You want a price to attract the offers as we discussed. You're really trying to get, your goal is to get multiple offers. The more offers you get, the more the buyers are competing. The more they compete, it pushes not only the price up, but also pushes up the better terms that you're looking for. So if you do have multiple offers and you want to set a deadline, you could say, okay, you know, you can tell the other buyers, agents who are inquiring, okay, I've got 6 contracts. We're going to decide on Sunday night at 6 o'clock. Take the time to revise your offers if you wish, give us your highest and best, which means not just the highest price, but also the best terms, and we'll make a decision at that time. Now, best terms, again, as we mentioned, aren't necessarily related to price. They may be that somebody put more money down, say they were cash. Well, that would probably, carry some impact because you don't have to worry about the loan going through. Or that they could close early, or they could do rent back, or any number of things that you would take into consideration as to what's highest and best. So how about negotiating with the other agent? I'm suggesting that's probably not the approach that you want to take. You don't want to treat the other agent like the enemy. No, you're both trying to make this transaction happen. You should be on friendly terms. You do represent different sides, but you need to be able to communicate freely. Okay, say for example, the seller said, well, I like your contract in all respects, except for the fact that you're asking for seller contribution to closing costs, that in this market, I just can't see that. If you could drop that, maybe find some other way to get the funds, I think my client would be willing to select your contract. Would you go talk to your side, the buyer, and see if there maybe isn't some other way in which they could obtain their closing costs, because otherwise the seller probably won't be able to work with that. So you're just setting up, you're setting it up, you're not demanding anything. You're just saying, my side would be willing to do this and would you go talk to your side? You're trying to just keep it together. You're both trying to make this thing work. So remember, our agents are not parties to the agreement. There's no reason for you to be upset with another agent. Maybe they said something that bothered you, but let it drop. That's sometimes emotions get in the way, and don't let your emotions be a barrier to the sale. Both agents should be trying to calm the waters. A purchase of a home is a very emotional thing. It's a very expensive thing. And so sometimes either side can get, overly wrought. And so you just need to say, okay, I see where you're coming from. But let's look at where we are now. We've almost got this done. Maybe we should at least try to see if we can work something out with the other side. So you're still representing the best interest of your client, but you don't need to be confrontational. Share what you learned with your client. Don't divulge your client's position, but if the other side does divulge something, well, you take it to your side. But you can help your client understand the value of compromise as a way to get the transaction completed. Buyer wants to buy, seller wants to sell. Let's focus on that, find a way to make this thing work. Okay, now let's talk about some other areas that you might have to use your negotiating skills. Like, for instance, negotiating home inspection issues. Well, this is often the most contentious issue in the transaction, because the sellers hate getting that list of things to fix. They figure they've done a lot to get the house ready to sell, and to have somebody say, oh, well, that's not good enough, I want more done, really sets them off. So it's important that you set proper expectations with your buyer, that when they do a home inspection, that probably the most important issues are going to be right up front. Oftentimes they might be in red ink, to say that, okay, these are safety issues, these are things that really need to be taken care of right away. But the rest of the items are oftentimes for your benefit for future maintenance of the house, not necessarily to ask the seller to complete those things. Now, if you're not in any competition, say the house is an older house that needs a lot of work, well, certainly, you want to get as many of those things fixed as possible. But if you're in competition, this is a really good way to ruin the transaction by asking for too many things. So you're not telling them not to, but you're just saying, well, perhaps, you know, we need to be a little careful and not ask too many things, or we would stand a chance to not be able to get the contract completed. Because the seller doesn't have to fix them. They can say, no, I won't. You know, and now you're going to have to make a decision whether you want to move ahead or not. Now, there is another option that I see employed a lot today, and that's the home inspection for void purposes only. That allows you to do a home inspection and void the contract and get your EMD back if you see anything that looks just way too much for you to handle in buying a home. So that's one way to do it. And there's also a little kind of a hidden technique in that say you did a inspection for void purposes only, but the inspector pointed out that the water heater was rusted and likely it could really go at any time. And so you say, well, you know, you come back to the seller and say, well, look, you know, we're probably going to void now because we just, you know, I can't have that happen. We need to have that water heater fixed. If you could just fix that one thing for us, we're going to go ahead and continue to purchase the home. But now, that could go back and forth. You know, maybe the seller say, well, okay, I'll do that. Or maybe they say, well, what if we split it 50-50? So there could be any number of ways that you could do that. But everything's negotiable up to the last minute. So even though you said, I'm not going to send you a list of things to fix, that doesn't mean you can't still negotiate some important item and keep the contract alive. So if you're representing the seller, you need to set proper expectations with the seller as well. Most buyers they got a right to do an inspection. Now we're going to talk a little bit about walkthrough inspection issues. Now normally in the past we usually just did one walkthrough that was done at the day of settlement, and if there was something that was an issue we discovered in the walkthrough, well, there's certainly no time left to do anything about it. All you could do is try to come up with some sort of monetary amount to cover what you saw as a discrepancy. Now we're really allowed any number of walkthroughs, but you know, practically speaking, you probably do two, maybe one a week or 10 days before settlement, so that if you see some things that need to be fixed, that there's still time for the seller to fix it. And then of course one done at the day of settlement, so that when all the furniture is removed, you can see if there was something that was still an issue that perhaps you had to, you know, negotiate a monetary settlement. If you do see something new that 1 week prior walkthrough, it gives you time to maybe get a contractor to give you an estimate, so that when you get to settlement, you're not just throwing out a number just from anywhere. You've actually got an estimate to work with. Advise your client that the worst idea, particularly for the buyer, is not to show up at settlement, because then you're in default. Now, going back to this new COVID-19 addendum, in situations today, maybe that's beyond your control. Maybe you can't get a home inspector. Maybe a home inspector doesn't want to go into somebody's house, or maybe you know, that you have a hard time finding a time when the seller would be willing to have someone come into the house. So that's where you can add some days for this to be accomplished, or that you just agree under these circumstances we're just going to do without it, nobody's at fault, or we're not going to continue the contract, nobody at fault. So there's a good use for that COVID-19 addendum there too. Closing credits. Well, sometimes last minute issues need a monetary solution. And you, as a 100% agent, you could always do a broker credit at settlement to either the buyer or the seller, both, as a way to resolve issues, or perhaps that is something you had discussed with your client as a way to hold on to your commission percents more, that at settlement you would credit a certain amount of money to your client. Again, it has to come from the broker. We have a broker credit letter form. You can email it to us. We can do it within minutes. Send you a broker credit letter to the title company. The title company will then collect the funds for you. Agents may need help to close the transaction. Agents need broker credit letter to contribute to these funds. So some say that there was a conflict, a dispute, say it was over the walkthrough, and say the buyer and the seller could not agree on a number, and everything looks like it's going to fall apart. Perhaps the seller's agent and the buyer's agent could both agree to credit them with a broker credit letter, a certain amount of money, to make the problem disappear. I know you probably don't like to do that, but it's certainly a way to make sure you get most of your commission as opposed to getting zero. So what do we need to do to get to win-win? So communication is the key. Just keep people talking. Choose your words wisely, think through, don't be angry, don't let emotion carry you away. Keep a smile on your face. There's no reason for you to be angry about anything. You're supposed to be trying to calm the waters and make things work. The importance of being earnest. The fact that you're trying so hard to help them achieve this transaction, because if it falls apart, everybody's going to be unhappy, maybe even mad. They'll probably blame you, probably blame the other agent too. So trying to find a solution that you're on their side, you're really trying to make this happen, it does go a long ways. When transactions fail, everyone loses. Therefore, it behooves everyone to give a little to get a lot, and that's what we call win-win. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this class. You can contact me if you have any issues. I'm at fairfaxrealty.com. If you would like a copy of the slideshow, send me an email, and I will send you a copy of the slideshow as well. Okay, thank you very much. Be safe out there, and we'll see you next time.